If all goes well, we can be in Tehran by August. And George goes like this. He turns off the microphone and he turns to me and he says, did he say Tehran or did he say Baghdad? And I go, because I'm talking 22 years ago. So I knew the guy that was in there. He was the deputy director of ops. And I said, hey, I'm here to, his name was John. I said, John, I'm here to sign my secrecy agreements. He had them all laid out. There were 6 of them. He had them laid out. No. This is a junior guy. Okay. More junior than Brennan. Brennan was the deputy executive director at the time. So I signed 6 secrecy agreements. And I go, so what's up?
We're going to Iraq.
He says, well, early next year, we're going to invade Iraq. We're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And we're going to open the world's biggest Air Force base in southern Iraq. And then we're going to move all of our air assets out of Saudi Arabia so we can deprive Osama bin Laden of the ability to say that we are polluting the land of the 2 holy mosques.
This feels like a Saturday Night Live skit.
And I looked at him like my mouth was...
Yeah.
And it's so like fucked with me. All I could blurt out was, but we haven't caught bin Laden yet. I thought that was the mission. The mission was to capture or kill Osama bin Laden. That's what we were all working on.
He starts laughing.
And he goes, dude, the decision's already been made.
Yeah.
The battle lines are already drawn.
Oh my God.
He said, the pro-war groups are OVP, Office of the Vice President, OSD, Office of the Secretary of Defense, and National Security Advisor. He said the anti-war groups are state, CIA, and Joint Chiefs. And he said, and we've been outvoted.
And this is interesting too, because George Tenet gets a lot of shit for the quote slam dunk.
Slam dunk.
Now I read In the Eye of the Storm. That was the name of his book, right? I read that years ago. You know, I always get very suspicious of the CIA guys and whatever.
Yeah.
However, George Tenet is one of the guys over the years I've studied who ironically was in charge. He was in charge from 97 to 04, which is when all the shit happened.
That's
so
right.
On paper, if you just looked at it, you'd be like, well, he must have been fucking terrible. I actually like George Tenet.
I do too.
And I think George Tenet, and I know that's just because you're Greek. But
yeah, that's 90% of it, yes.
But
I don't think George likes me very much, but I like him.
I think George Tenet is actually a real guy. He doesn't strike me as a spooky dude. He's a real emotional dude.
He was never in the CIA.
Before being
the deputy director.
Which also like is another perfect point coming from the outside because he kind of has that. He's not ingrained in it, right? But he took so much shit for this stuff continues to. But I feel like I believe you when you say that camp. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I believe you for all of the CIA. I guarantee there were some other dudes there who were about this.
Totally. But, you're right. But institutionally, the CIA was so laser focused on Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, they didn't want to be distracted by a war of choice in Iraq. Another thing I learned is that in almost every one of these scenarios that came up during the course of my career, the Joint Chiefs of Staff were the most anti-war of any of the major policy entities.
I like that. Mm-hmm. That's literally been their life.
Yeah, because their position was, wait a minute. The State Department hasn't even tried to defuse this. Yeah. Let the State Department work this first. And then we'll see later on if we need to go to war.
Because they know the cost, too, more than anyone. They understand
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Yeah. So I'm sitting in this briefing. Cheney's chairing it. And everybody else is just kind of sitting there. And Cheney says to General Franks, excuse me. Cheney says to General Franks, why don't you start off with the order of battle? I've said before, I hate order of battle briefings. I hate them. They're so boring to me. And I'm not a military analyst. So it's like we have elements of the 1st Division are moving northwest, and we have the 5th Cavalry, they're going here, and then we've got the brigade. Who cares? First of
Go
all,
fucking hit him.
yeah, seriously. Like, do we really need to know these details? Just do what you do and tell us how it turns out. So I'm writing all this stupid stuff down. And then Frank's...
Are you making faces while you're writing it?
I know, right?
You definitely are.
I probably was. So I'm writing it all down, and George is just sitting there like a statue, just sitting there like this, not making any facial expressions or anything. And again, it's not his position to talk here. The policy decision's been made, so our role is over, pretty much. So General Franks, as he's wrapping up his briefing, he says, if all goes well, we can be in Tehran by August. And George goes like this. He turns off the microphone and he turns to me and he says, did he say Tehran or did he say Baghdad? And I go, he said Tehran.
Oh my God.
And he says, have these people lost their minds?
Yeah.
And then he turns the mic back on and just sits there. So the briefing ends. I go back to the office. The deputy director says, how'd the briefing go? And I said, did you know we were going to invade Iran? And he goes, oh, are they still talking about that?
Oh my God.
He goes, we're not going to invade Iran. These guys don't know anything about the Middle East. And we didn't, because we got bogged down as soon as... there was this one idiot from the National Security Council. I don't want to say his name, but I didn't like this guy from the very beginning. And it was because he was demeaning. Like, he would call Iraqis, which really bothered me. I found it to be racist. And he had mocking terms for the Kurds. It just bothered me. And so he said, as Franks ended his briefing, he said, as soon as we cross that border tomorrow, they're going to throw flowers at us. And I said to the deputy director afterwards, I told him what this guy had said. And I said, these guys really don't understand that we are going to be an invading and occupying force.
Right.
Like, if the Canadians crossed our border militarily, I wouldn't be throwing flowers at them, right? So imagine if the Americans go halfway around the world to invade an Arab country. Yeah, they're not going to be throwing flowers at us.
Yeah.
But these idiots actually believed it.
I've talked about this a bunch on the podcast, but there's a story my friend Ryan Tate had told in episode 117, and I could never remember if it was him because he was a recon Marine doing these door knocks, or if it was someone else, and he just confirmed for me it was a story he had heard. But, when we were in Iraq, obviously, and shit was going south, all the different units had to do door-to-doors from a safety precaution,
which we're not good at.
And even besides that, though, like, we had created an environment where we had to do that.
That's right.
It's like the guys have to follow orders. They have to go in there, guns, get on the fucking floor, whatever. And the way the story went is that they go into a house and they're getting everyone on the floor, whatever, head down. And a 7-year-old kid comes up looking at him with the guns with a 1,000-yard stare and puts his hands up and then lays down on the floor, head down. And they're like, no, trying to speak something to get him to be like, no, you don't have to get on the floor, whatever. And they like pull him up and the kid looks at him with a 1,000-yard stare and just like almost like a ghost, like floats into the next room where they send him. And, like dead to the world because this was his reality. And the point of the story was that kid, when he's a terrorist in 15 years and blowing up innocents or whatever, I'm not saying empathize with that act. That's bad. Someone made that decision. But if you can't see where the fuck he was born, your eyes aren't open.
There are consequences.
That's right.
To our decisions. I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned in Pakistan was that of the low-level Al-Qaeda fighters, of the low-level Al-Qaeda fighters that I participated in capturing, and I mean like kids that were 18 to say 25. They almost all told exactly the same story. None of them could read and write. I don't know what's the matter with me. None
you
of
want
them.
to take a drink?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. This break is brought to you by John taking a sip.
So they couldn't read and write. They had no skills, no job training. Many of them had very poor relationships with their fathers, which I never really understood, but it's not my bailiwick. And they wanted to get married. But what man would want his daughter to marry a guy who can't read, can't write, can't work, has no skills, and no future? I wouldn't want my daughter to marry a guy like that.
Sure.
So the local imam would go up to these guys and say, you don't want to live in this terrible little village. You should go make jihad against the Americans. And we'll give you $200 a month. And if you're martyred, we'll give your parents a $500 martyrdom bonus. And so they'd go to Pakistan and be smuggled into Afghanistan. They had no beef against the United States until we started droning their villages.
Yep.
And that's when everything changed. You know, Iraq is different because we were busting down the doors, being their daughters and killing their, parents and all that stuff. So in the places where we weren't at war, Tunisia, think, Algeria, Yemen, whatever, they had no beef against us. And then we started sending drones to blow up the hospital or the mosque or their house or whatever. And we killed their cousin and we killed their dad and we killed the grandfather. And now all they want to do is kill Americans.
Yeah, it's a never-ending cycle, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at like October 7th, which was, it was terrible what happened there. And the guys who did that are deplorable. I don't want to be misheard here.
Totally agree.
I see where a 20-year-old floating over that border in a fucking parachute who's lived in a 20-mile zone where he's not allowed to leave his entire life with no hope, trapped in there like sardines, which was, there were two sides to that story too.
Sure.
Like I see Israel's position on that.
Sure, I do too.
However, it's like I see where that anger comes from.
I do too.
I'm not in
I don't
any way
advocate death
correct.
and destruction, but I understand the anger.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.